at how we break down unsaturated fatty acids, and then going into synthesis, and then the regulation of synthesis versus breakdown, metabolism. So synthesis, anabolism, and breakdown, metabolism. So I'm making some summary slides to help you because people didn't do as well in real time on that last clicker quiz. And so I think it's been a little tricky for you to remember what's coming off of each cycle when you don't have it in front of you. So I'm putting these summaries. So right now we're focused here on the oxidation of fatty acids. And this is actually going to be occurring in the mitochondrial matrix. And then you're going to be producing acetyl-CoA, which is in the mitochondrial matrix via the citric acid cycle. And then that's going to be giving, right, these NADH and FADH2 to the electron transport chain. So right now we're going to be figuring out the oxidation of the fatty acids. It produces acetyl-CoA, which we know from the previous lectures, right, from the citric acid cycle, that every time you go around, you produce 3 NADH and 1 FADH2 and 1 GTP equivalent to ATP. And then those go into the mitochondrial inner membrane, and you get 2.5 ATP for NADH, 1.5 ATP for FADH2, and that's because of where it enters, right? This is entering complex 1, this is entering complex 2. So here, I want to make the point, you're going to see it in a minute, that when you have everything happening in the mitochondria, right, you're not losing any ATP to transport, from the cytosol to the mitochondria, which you lose here, right? In glycolysis, right, when you're generating pyruvate and acetyl-CoA, you have to worry about transporting to the mitochondria. Here, this is in the mitochondria. So, talking about oxidation of fatty acids, you're seeing themes, again, emerge on all of these biosynthetic, in this case, actually, catabolism process. So, in order to catabolize it, we have to activate it via CoA, and we have to put energy in to add this CoA, which is ATP. So ATP is coming in, and then this is the fatty acid. So this R group is that long acyl chain, and then this is the carboxyl head. So don't be misled thinking this is like an H, right, or CH2. This is that long chain for the fatty acid. So it's like C16, C14, C18, right? So basically what we have here is, this is, you don't, again, need to push arrows, but if you want to, you can see this is coming in. 2 phosphates are released as pyrophosphate, which are then converted back to phosphate. So this is not what we've been seeing most of the time, right? Most of the time we've been seeing ATP goes to ADP with release of 1 phosphate, and it uses up a lot more energy. You actually release a lot more energy when you're doing ATP to AMP, and for the purposes of the book, it's equivalent to using 2 ATP to get to cleave off that 2 phosphate groups as pyrophosphate is basically equivalent to using 2 ATP. So later on, when I say 2 ATP, this is why. So you're activating by putting on this CoA group, and you're using the power of ATP to do this activation. Then the AMP comes off. This is a fatty acid demylation, which we're not really focusing on in class, but it's another way that this ATP moiety works. And then AMP comes off, and you're left with your activated fatty acid. So the main point here is you have to activate via CoA, right, here, and then you're putting in 2 ATPs, essentially, to be able to do this. And by doing this, it makes it exergonic, and so it's highly irreversible. And you have 2 parts of it. You have this part for the 2-step process, and then that pyrophosphate is going to phosphate, also giving you exergonic process. So, so this was just to make sure that I said that, which I didn't. Sometimes I just slow myself down. So we talked about the oxidation of fatty acids, and basically, you have the fatty acid in the cytosol, but then the oxidation, like I said, occurs in the mitochondria. So at the very first step, you have to get this R, the long chain, activated fatty acid into the mitochondrial matrix. And so you do that, again, this is a theme, right, through a shuttle. And so the shuttle is basically converting the activated form into a form of the fatty acid with carnitine, this structure here. That gets transported into the matrix through a specific transporter. And then in the matrix, again, you want the activated fatty acid. So basically, you're using the same enzyme, but just a different one of them, so a different isoform. So this is carnitine acetyl transferase 2, and now it's removing the carnitine group, and you're getting this this fatty acid attached to CoA. And then the carnitine is recycled. So basically, if you're looking at this, right, this will be an anti-porter, just to go through these themes, where you have carnitine, CoA, the fatty acid conjugated to carnitine coming in, and then carnitine unconjugated coming out. So whenever another theme that we've been talking about is how do you get precursors, where they need to be. In this case, when we're talking about the generation of acetyl-CoA, we're already in the mitochondria, right, from the fatty acid, but we just need to get the fatty acid in there. And so this transporter allows you to do it. Okay. And you can see right here, you're actually not using ATP. Where you're using ATP is actually to activate that CoA. So it's right at the beginning. And like I said, it's about a cost of 2 ATPs for every activated fatty acid. So now we're coming into what happens. So we're in the mitochondria, and basically we're going to successively remove 2 carbons as acetyl-CoA. So if you have something that's like a C16, right, you start at the carboxyl end, which is here, and then every 2, 1, 2, you get cleavage. And we're going to go through the reaction. 2, you get a cleavage, 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 and at the end you're left with another acetyl-CoA. So you end up having, right, so you have your carboxyl group here, and then you're going to have 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cleavages, and then the last one is also acetyl-CoA. So whenever you have like a even number, like C16, unsaturated fatty acid, saturated, fully hydrogenated fatty acid, then in this case, right, you'll always have the number of carbons, 16 divided by 2 acetyl-CoAs, and you'll have the number of carbons minus 1. I'm going to summarize this again of these cycles going through. Right, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but then in the end we have 8 acetyl-CoAs because the last group is also acetyl-CoA. Here you can see 8 acetyl-CoAs, that goes into the cycle and then goes into the electron transport chain. So let's look at the actual process. So you're also seeing this kind of strategy happening over and over. So basically here, a lot of these reactions are similar to what you see in the citric acid cycle. So we have to break a stable bond at this beta position, okay? And so we want to get a ketone on this beta group and then be able to make it a better leaving group so that we can actually break the bond. So we're starting with palmitoyl-CoA, which you should remember is C16-0, right? So it's has no double bonds. And the first thing that we do is we're using a dehydrogenase, which you all know, right, is going to actually be about transferring electrons. So when you have FAD, that's usually associated with the protein, and so FAD is going to FADH2. So in this case where we have oxidation, right, we're actually reducing FAD. So when we form this double bond here, it's in trans, and this will be important in a couple slides. So from here, when we have this trans double bond, another enzyme comes in, and then it actually converts this into an OH group, And then moving it over here, we have another dehydrogenase, again, electron transfer, NAD to NADH, and we're converting this right to this keto group. And then we have thiolase, or a acyltransferase, right? And so what's happening here is where you're getting the cleavage. So you're cleaving right where we wanted it to happen, right here, and we're getting one group coming off as acetyl-CoA on this side, and then this CoA is coming in here, attacking here, and you're getting a second one. So what you end up with each cycle is a release of acetyl-CoA, which we saw, and the chain is shortened by 2. So now it's C14, and then with the R group, right, C14, as the R group, and here's the top of it, and then acetyl-CoA. So let's look at, and then, oh yeah, I just wanted to mention, in case you're interested, you can look at the similarity to the TCA cycle. So this one is similar to succinate dehydrogenase, this is similar to fumarase, this is similar to malate dehydrogenase. And so basically the idea of that is that you're using similar types of enzymes to do similar types of chemistry. And so you can reinforce it by looking at that. So what I just mentioned to you, right, is that we started with this molecule, and then with each round, right, an acetyl-CoA came off, and then we reduced it from C16 to C14. An acetyl-CoA came off, which is 2 carbons, C14 to C12. An acetyl-CoA came off, we're down to C10. An acetyl-CoA off, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the very last molecule, which you can see here, right, is an acetyl-CoA, right, the one that's left. So you're cleaving, 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 and each time the acetyl-CoA comes off, and the very last one, you're left with an acetyl-CoA. So if we're summarizing this, right, from the very top, we have to use 2 ATP to activate FA, and this is that ATP to AMP conversion, right, to put that CoA on the fatty acid, and that's equivalent to using 2 ATPs. So when your book and other people are doing these calculations, they're really just counting it as 2 ATPs. And then in the oxidation part, we were talking about saturated, right, even numbered. So like C16 will be similar for C18, and C20, right? So to make it easy for you, I made this idea, right, where every time you would use N, so if it was C16, the N over 2 acetyl-CoAs, because you're cleaving every 2 carbons, right? So you would actually have 8, and then you would have N over 2 minus 1 NADHs. From that cycle, right, you only have to do the cycle 7 times, right? If we look at that cycle and where you cleave, right, 7 times, and that's where the NADH comes off, and that's where, you can't see my finger, that's where the NADH comes off, and that's where the FAD comes off. Okay, so now if we go back here, so that's N2 minus 1, so 7 and 7. Then this goes into acetyl production per acetyl-CoA. So we take this number here, which was 8, and then for every 8 acetyl-CoA, we'd have 8 times 3 NADH, 8 times 1 FADH2, and just review the citric acid cycle if you don't remember this, and then 8 times 3 ATP, 8 times 1 ATP. And then finally, that goes into electron transport chain, and this is how much you get per 1. So if we look at the total yield, right, we start with the C16. So this is basically just what I was showing you. You put in the CoAs, the FAD, the NAD+, right, and then you get the 8 acetyl-CoAs. So 16, if N is 16, it would be N over 2 is 8, N over 2 minus 1, right, to get these numbers. And that's just based on the chemistry of that 2-carbon cleavage. Then it goes into the TCA cycle, right? So here what we're doing is we're looking at 7 plus 8, FADH2, because we have in the TCA cycle, we have 8 of these coming from acetyl-CoA. So the key here is I'm adding what's coming from acetyl-CoA, right? So we're having 8 FADH2, 8 times 3 NADH, and then 8 GTP, right? And then this is just adding these together, just to be clear. And then after oxidative phosphorylation, we're doing, right, we're just looking back at that summary sheet, and now we're doing 15 FAD right here, converted to FADH2. So that would be 15 FADH2 times 1.5 ATP, right, in the electron transport chain. And then 31 NADH times 2.5, and then we have the ATP. So that total is 108, just based on those calculations. But we forgot something. So what did we forget in this total? Yeah? What? Yeah, so we used two ATPs at the very beginning to make this palmitoyl-CoA. So in the end, we had 2 ATPs for activation of FA. That was that ATP to AMP conversion. And so it's really 106 ATPs. So when we show this beta oxidation, and this is the way it's often shown, you're smart, and you have to realize that this doesn't, you know, we have to activate it. Whenever you're activating something with CoA, you're using energy to do that. That's 2 ATPs. So we have to make sure we put that in. And what we see is that this is really making a lot of ATP, right? We're making 106 ATP per 1 molecule of palmitate. And this is a lot of energy. So here, whenever you're looking at efficiency, you're basically looking up on table 3.13-4, the amount of oxidation, fully oxidation, right, of a compound like palmitate, and it's 9,800 kilojoules. And then you compare it to this, again, these are all standards, but standard free energy under biological conditions, but not the concentrations of reactants and products. But we're getting really close to 33%, which is, you're seeing is kind of common for something that's really good. And in fact, when you put in all the real conditions, it's closer to 60% efficiency. So this is really, really pretty good. And if you remember, if we compare this to glucose oxidation is getting 2,800 kilojoules per mole. And I gave you the table so you can look these up if you want. So we're getting much more from oxidation of palmitate, and they're equally efficient. Basically, this is also ends up being around that number of 60% in reality. So we talked about saturated fatty acids, but now we're just going to mention what if it's unsaturated. So for example, so basically for the saturated plants and animals make the unsaturated, but then, make the saturated, but then plants tend to be more highly favored to make the monounsaturated and are the only ones that make polyunsaturated. So animals also can make some unsaturated, monounsaturated, and they need to actually for membrane stability and fluidity, but plants can make polyunsaturated. I'm just going to show you how this works for mono, and then the poly is similar, but I'm not going to ask you about it. There's one more enzyme in there, but the theme will hold up. So here we have C18-1, so we know there are 18 carbons, there's one double bond, and that double bond is at carbon 9. We're always starting this position from this head group, right, the carboxyl group, which here has a CoA on it, it's activated. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, it's a double bond. And when you have these fatty acids, they're always in cis. So they're always naturally occurring in cis. And what does that mean? That means that you have the hydrogens on the same side of the double bond. So what can happen here is we start out, we use the same enzymes that we used for the saturated fatty acid, and we go cleave, 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 right? So we had 1, 2, 3 before we hit the double bond, and we get the 3 acetyl-CoA coming off. But then it's like, oh, what do we do with this, right? And this is in cis. So what we have to do is convert it to trans, right? So now the hydrogens are on opposite sides of the double bond, and then we can continue on with our cycles. So when you do this, I'm going to go back and show you the reaction. This allows these other enzymes to work, right, within this oxidation pathway, but you have to actually have this extra step, right, of converting the cis to trans. And so when you are going in here, you're not doing this one step where you have make FADH2, so you have one less for the cycle with a double bond, because you don't need to introduce it. So let me show you what I'm saying, right? So here, right, it has a double bond, but we just have to convert it from cis to trans, and then we can keep going, and then we can keep cleaving. And so, if I go backwards, right, so what we're talking about is, right here, we had to introduce the double bond in trans, but for the monounsaturated, it already has a double bond, it's just it's cis. So we convert it to trans, and then we keep going happily, okay? And then for every one after that, where it's just normal, we just keep cleaving, cleaving, cleaving. So the thing that you're missing is this one conversion. So you're missing one FADH2 for every double bond that you have. Back to where we were. Okay, so I think now you understand why I have this here, right? You're coming in at this trans and you missed that FADH2 production. So you'll end up getting 9 acetyl-CoA, 3 coming off from here, and then 6 coming off from here to give you 9. And you'll see here that I started with a C18 instead of a C16. So it's not like I'm making extra, right? So if we're going to look at this summarizing in your heads, I'm going to go to the next slide, but try to think about how this would be different in payoff from the fully saturated. So basically, you still have to activate it, so you consume those 2 ATPs. And now, right, you're still getting that same number of acetyl-CoAs. They're coming off, they're coming off, they're coming off. You convert it to cis to trans, it comes off, it comes off, it comes off. But you have, and you still have the same number of MADHs, but you lose one FADH2, right? Because you're entering the cycle at that double bond stage, at that trans stage. So everything is the same except that you lose one FADH2, and then this will affect that net production. Right? So if we lose that one FADH2, then we're going to be losing, right, 1.5 ATP. So if we look at this, now we're going to put it into action. You want to think about which would give you the most ATP. So I'm going to start it now and then move it over.
It's a single bond.
I know what they look like.
I wasn't paying attention.
Which one gives you the most energy? So whichever one is not monounsaturated.
Don't they have to be? Is it single?
It's one of the first two.
So it has to be the longest one that's single? Which one's that one? Oh, so C. Oh, shoot.
Oleic doesn't have any... Wait, stearic acid?
I'm thinking C. Because it doesn't have any double bonds and it's the longest one. I'm over here. I'll have to rewatch this lecture.
Yeah, you're right. Did you know the structure? Are you doing
this
for other class?
Yeah, this is due soon, so I gotta finish this.
This is your UGPA one?
No, it's the seminar for dietetics. Gotta do that.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All clickers in. I'm just gonna stop it. Hopefully it's in the right field. And we'll look at the answer. So that was great, 93%. So if we look at, actually I'll close this. Sorry, I hate framing like this, but it's what I have to do. Oh my god. It's so weird, it goes out in the field. Okay, so this one I can okay, just do it like that. Alright, so sorry about that. Should be back in. Okay. Yeah. So it was stearic acid. Almost all of you got it. So the rationale was, right, the more carbons that you have, these are all even, the more acyl-CoAs. So you would get 9 acyl-CoAs coming off of here, where you'd only get, right, 8 coming off here, and then, 8 coming off here, actually from all of those. And then if you have it unsaturated, right, one double bond, you know we're losing a little bit of energy because we don't have that FADH2 production. So good job. So there's one more, well, there are more than one, but we're going to discuss one more variation on this, which is looking at odd numbers. So odd number fatty acids are mostly coming from plants and marine organisms. And basically in this case, we're not going to spend a lot of time. I just want to have you familiar with the concept. You go through the same reactions, boom, 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 boom. But at the end, right, you have a 2 and a 3. You're left with a 5 carbon. So you're not going to cleave it and get 2 acetyl-CoAs. So you're going to get 1 acetyl-CoA, and that final group will be propionyl-CoA. And this is what it looks like. It basically just has 3 carbons with that CoA. And so then what you need to do is convert propionyl-CoA to something useful. So the way it goes to something useful is we put in ATP. We also are actually putting in CO2, but we're putting in ATP, talking from an energy perspective. And then we're converting it to succinyl-CoA, where it can go into the citric acid cycle. So you get a little bit less energy again when you have something that's odd number, because you have to put in ATP and then feed it into the citric acid cycle. And so you lose a little bit of energy. So you don't need to know a lot of details about this, just that you don't get as much energy from one that's 3 carbon, odd, because you have to deal with that 3 carbon molecule. How do you deal with a 3 carbon molecule? You convert it into the tricarboxylic acid cycle, right? Tricarboxyl, 3, and then that's how you're able to make it useful. So, So we're now going to switch. We just talked about fatty acid oxidation, and we feel pretty good about that. We're skipping the glyoxylate cycle in plants. As a plant person, I'm sad, but timing-wise, I just felt it was more important to spend the time going over how we add up these numbers and how it works. And we will be talking about photosynthesis and some other plant-specific things. Often plants can do extra special things. Okay. So now we're going to talk about fatty acid biosynthesis, ketone bodies, how fatty acids are made, and then how this is regulated, right? Both the catabolism and the synthesis. So ketone bodies is a really weird word because they're not bodies. You would expect that they're little bodies moving around. Not little bodies, but it's just a really bizarre word, right, to use. So it's an artifact. That's what people originally called them, and it's really misleading because it makes you think that it's something that's not soluble, right? But actually, they're very soluble. And there are 3 different compounds in ketone bodies. They're all related. So acetone, right? If you've ever removed nail polish, you know acetone. And it smells, right? It's highly volatile. And so if you're producing ketone bodies, you're actually always producing some acetone, and you can actually detect that in your breath. And it's one way of detecting, we'll talk about more in a minute, diabetes. So actually we can detect quite a bit from our breath in terms of metabolism. It's also, and you're going to look at it in a second, making acetoacetate. So again, you'll have this group here, but then this extra carboxyl group, acetoacetate, right? And then this again, very similar, except instead of having the double bond here, we have an OH, and this is beta hydroxybutyrate. Okay. So this one, these two are for soluble energy transport, and this one is exhaled. All three of them are ketone bodies, and you'll see in a minute, this is the precursor to these two. So the brain can't use fatty acids, but it can use ketone bodies. So this is a really important thing about one of the reasons why they're made. And you'll see that they can be really useful as a storage form, but they're usually made at a really tiny rate, and it's only under very unusual conditions, which I have here, that they tend to accumulate to high levels. And those unusual conditions we'll talk about more, but they tend to be starvation and severe diabetes that's untreated. So how do we actually form these ketone bodies? So you take 2 acetyl-CoA, okay, you can see that well. And then when you see a thiol lace, right, you're cleaving that thiol bond and the CoA is coming off, right? And then here you have acetoacetyl-CoA, right? Here's the other CoA. So you have 2 CoAs. Basically, that CoA is activating to form, help with this reaction. Then one of the CoAs comes off. You get acetoacetyl-CoA. Then that CoA is coming off, and you're getting HMG, I'm just going to say, CoA. Okay. And then that CoA is coming off, and you're getting acetoacetate. I think I said something wrong. So you have 2 of these coming together, 1 CoA comes off, so you have 1 CoA here, then you get conversion to this HMG, you still have this CoA in this position, then you have lyase where the acetyl-CoA is coming off, and then you're left with acetoacetate. Okay. So you're actually getting rid of both CoA groups. So this acetoacetate, I said, is the precursor for both acetone and beta hydroxybutyrate, and all 3 of them are considered ketone bodies. And like I said, this one is volatile and it's exhaled, and so you can detect that from the breath, and it's associated with diabetes. And then this one is the one that's exported. So this is made in the liver, so specifically in the liver, and then it's exported to other tissues. So like the brain can't make it, but it gets exported and then it can use it. And then basically it's going to convert these back to acetyl-CoA. So basically, just to reinforce this, that the brain cannot use fatty acids, but it can use this. So if glucose becomes unavailable, you have to have something, right? And so these ketone bodies can be really important under starvation or this extreme diabetes. So what is the role of the ketone body in low-calorie diet? So this is basically just going through kind of what I was saying. So you produce the ketone bodies during carbohydrate deficiency. So when you have low blood glucose, right, you have these lipid droplets, the fatty acids are in the liver, right? And then the fatty acids, right, the lipid droplets can't be used by the brain. So what can happen, and again, this happens really low levels usually, it's only like literally starvation when your body's gonna shut down and your brain, so you have to do something. Also why coma is one of the things that severe diabetes that's untreated. So then you have the fatty acids, they get oxidized to acetyl-CoA, and they can go into the citric acid cycle, make oxaloacetate, which can then be used for gluconeogenesis to make glucose, which can be exported. Okay, so that's one thing. But then this draws off the cycle of the citric acid cycle. And so, because, right, you have to replenish oxaloacetate, and so you can't, you can only do this so much. And what happens is then acetyl-CoA builds up, right? Because this is a cycle. Remember, we absolutely need oxaloacetate to come in here with acetyl-CoA to make citrate. And if you are pulling it off, which you are here because you're desperate, right? Then acetyl-CoA builds up. So if acetyl-CoA builds up, that's the case where you get this ketone body formation. Because remember, at the very beginning, it was 2 acetyl-CoAs coming in, right? So when those 2 acetyl-CoAs come in, you form these ketone bodies, right? These 3 compounds, and then those can be exported to the muscle and the heart for fuel, and also to the brain. So one thing that's interesting about this as well is that you have to recycle the CoA, and if we look at that reaction again, you'll see that that CoA is recycled, right? That final product, right? So we have 2 acetyl-CoAs coming in to make these. None of these have a CoA, right? So the CoAs are recycled, and they're needed to do this beta oxidation. So when you go back over your notes, you can look at that, but that's what allows this to keep happening and to make these, continue making these ketone bodies. So acetyl-CoA accumulates, it cannot enter the TCA cycle because you don't have the oxaloacetate to go around, so then it goes here to form the ketone bodies, and the recycling of it allows for continued beta oxidation. But, so this sounds good, right? Like, oh, great, we have a way of making us not die. But if you have too much, you get acidosis, and you actually, so the reason that you do is if you look at these molecules, and we can go back and look at them again, right? So these are acids, and so you have to worry because it actually changes the pH of the blood. And then when the pH of the blood is changed, it affects everything, right? It affects actually transport of blood proteins that are carrying fatty acids, or it affects everything, right? pH, you guys learned about amino acids and pKa's, right? So if you change the pH, you have a dramatic effect on binding of things to proteins, on protein conformation, on, everything.
Yeah, I know some of that.
So this can be super dangerous, leading to coma and even death. So ketone bodies are really useful, but if they accumulate to too high a level, it's really dangerous. And it can be monitored by monitoring acetone levels, for example, in the breath. Pretty soon, maybe even already, there'll be things connected to your iPhone or apps to do that. Okay, so I know we're moving on to a lot. So we just talked about how you catabolize fatty acids, and how when you catabolize them, you can actually use them to make ketone bodies, which can be useful under really severe conditions. But we didn't talk about how you make them. So you make them, right, when you have a lot of extra sugar.
They're healthy.
You have so much glucose coming in that you can actually store this in fatty acids and then in adipose tissue as fat, right? So this is a major theme again. So now we're synthesizing. So when you synthesize, you actually typically require ATP and you require reductant, right? Because you're making something and that end product is storing a lot of energy. When you catabolize something, you have something like palmitate, right, that has a lot of energy, and then you're releasing it in different forms. So here we're doing the opposite, right? We're making something that needs a lot of energy, and it needs it as ATP and reductant. And here we're using NADPH. And NADPH is used to distinguish from NADH. So we have a number of ways that you don't have fatty acid synthesis and catabolism happening at the same time. So I know I love the dress too, right? And the other thing is you have different enzymes. So unlike some reactions where you use like gluconeogenesis and glycolysis where you use a lot of the same ones, here they're very different. And the other thing is one is in the cytosol and one, so the synthesis is in the cytosol, and we just heard that catabolism is in the matrix. So they're two different locations, different sets of enzymes, and then one needs ATP and reductant and one produces ATP and reductant. But you never have them cycling in a fugal cycle in the same location, right? The same enzyme. So how do we do this? So this is another theme. So here we have, it's just a three-component enzyme reaction basically with this enzyme. So it's malonyl-CoA, acetyl-CoA carboxylase. Sometimes we just call it acetyl-CoA carboxylase, and sometimes ACC. So ACC is a really pretty cool enzyme, and ultimately what we're doing is forming malonyl-CoA. And malonyl-CoA, whenever you see that CoA on a compound, it's an activated compound that allows it to do other things, right? And so this is what you're going to see in a minute. We need malonyl-CoA for fatty acid synthesis. And so often when you are doing something like this, right, where you're putting on a CoA, you have to put in energy. So we're putting in ATP, and what's happening here, and we're putting in CO2, and CO2 is helping with the reaction mechanism. So we have CO2 coming in, and then we have this biotin arm, which is this long arm on this biotin carrier protein. And similar to the lip oil arm, it actually is holding on to the substrate and shifting the position. So another theme, right? I'm not letting go so something can diffuse and be slower, I'm moving it over. So in this case, right, we have this coming in, this carbonate forming CO2, then we get a shift in position, so now it's on this part, the arm is moving it over to the other active site, then we have acetyl-CoA coming in, and then we're forming ultimately recycling this as biotin, and malonyl acetyl-CoA comes off. So two things we're putting in for every malonyl-CoA, an ATP and an acetyl-CoA. And then that theme was the arm, right? And then also CO2, ATP, and acetyl-CoA being required. So this reaction is similar to pyruvate carboxylase, you don't need to know all these details about it, but we're focusing on animals here, and basically this is all in one, but there are multiple subunits. You can see 1, 2, 3, and in bacteria they actually have them as 3 separate proteins. So we have our malonyl-CoA, our activated group, right? So this is a theme, again, of having this activated group. So now, how do we actually make the fatty acid? So this is a multi-fatty acid synthase, and we're going to talk about fatty acid synthase 1, not the others. So this is in mammals, and it has 6 domains, and the others are really similar, just variations on the theme. So basically, you have this is your malonyl group, and it's attached by a SH linkage, a thiol linkage, to the fatty acid synthase. You're going to see here, right, there are 2 spots that you can have attachment to the protein, and we're going to look at this in the coming slide. One is to this brown oval, which is the acyl carrier protein, and then one is to another spot, another protein in this, another subunit in this this enzyme. So you have the malonyl-CoA group come in, and you have your first acetyl group, and they're both linked to via this SH chain. So the first thing that happens is a condensation. The CO2, so your book is good about color coding, comes off, and then this, right, is attaching here, and you get your, you're adding, right, 2 carbons. So just like we were taking 2 carbons off, when we were oxidizing, we're adding 2 carbons here, okay? So we just added 2 carbons, and then it's attached here. And then what we're doing is we're reducing it. And so whenever you reduce, whenever you have like a reductase, we'll see is the name of these enzymes, it's about reducing. So actually, in this case, a reductase is actually reducing what you have, and so you're oxidizing NADPH. Okay. So NADPH goes to NADP. So the name is actually talking about what it's doing to the substrate. Okay. So you have that reduction occurring, and you're getting, where's my arrow? So you're having that OH group here now, right, from the double bond. Then you have a dehydration, water comes off, you get the double bond here, you have another reduction, and you get this nice long 2-carbon addition to the chain. So you're extending it by 2 carbons each cycle. Okay. And you can see that we need, right, the malonyl that's activated, which required an acetyl-CoA and an ATP, and then we need NADPH and NADPH. You're going to see this last point on the next. So this is the same thing, just showing you another way. So basically, each addition you get another C2, and each addition you need another malonyl-CoA. So the malonyl-CoA comes on, right? So we're seeing it here. It gets that C2 carbon is shifted right over here. Another malonyl-CoA comes in. That C2 is shifted. So that shifts over here. Another malonyl-CoA comes in. That's shifted over here, and it keeps being added. And so what you're seeing here is CO2 coming off, and your book chose to write this as 4H plus 4 electrons, but we're going to be focusing on it as 2 NADPH plus H plus. Okay. So we know, if you go back to lecture 1 and everything we've talked about, that when you have this transfer, right, for NADPH, it's a hydride. So that's why it's 2 electrons per transfer and 2 hydrogens. But we're focusing on it as 2 NADPH per transfer. And we looked at that right here, right? 1, 2. So if we look at the structure in animals, I said there were 6 domains. And that includes that brown circle, which was the acyl carrier protein. And it's this really cool complex. And the acyl carrier protein, again, it's right this long chain that's helping move things around without them diffusing. So if we look, we're focusing only on FAS1, which is in animals, and plants and bacteria have a bigger variation on that theme. So if we look at how this happens, you first go and you load it. So you have the acetyl-CoA group. Then you load it with the malonyl-CoA. So one is on that acyl carrier protein, right? Just like I'm repeating what I showed you earlier, just in a different form to help reinforce it. So here, this is on this thioester, this thiol bond, and here this thiol bond. Then you have this reaction, and basically the whole thing is circling here. So if we start with 1, right? I have trouble seeing it. Okay, so here it's loaded, right? Then CO2 comes off. We get the addition, right? Then we get that switching of location. Then we're working through each of these steps, then we get the reduction, and then finally we get the translocation. So you might, if you were paying close attention in that very first slide, then like, wait, how does it end up back on the other one? Well, when we first talked about, so we already went through 1 through 4, like 2 slides ago, but we didn't talk about this the translocation and recharging. And so the translocation is when you switch it, right?
From 6 to 12.
And then here, the recharging is just adding another acetyl-CoA and another malonyl-CoA. So what do I mean by switching? If you were following it, right, this ACP, you can see how it's been moving, right, to these different positions. and it can go between the different, it can actually move to the different domains. And then up here, right, it was bound to ACP, and now it's bound to the other site on the KS domain. So in the end, if you look at biosynthesis, we've got acetyl-CoA. So this is really just adding everything up that we did before. So if you
I have to
want, you
rewatch
guys
this.
can go through it yourself because we're running out of time. And I'll do it again at the beginning of next lecture, but if I were you, I'd also go through this, see if you can come up with the same numbers. Thank you.
No, I cannot.